Welcome back to Postcards and Podcasts. I'm Thomas Mallitte, and we are in the studio at last, having returned from Upton Castle last time on our heritage tour with Howard Rudge. Our last in-studio interview was with John Foreman discussing natural heritage, and today I'm discussing the Rebels of Pembrokeshire with Naomi Chiffi. Mrs. Chiffi, please refer to her as if you leave any comments or wish to discuss it with me in the future. She is the great niece of Jemima Vowd, or Jemima Nicholas, the lady who arguably fended off the last invasion of Great Britain. How do we know each other?
We know each other, Mr. Mallitte, because I used to be your teacher.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a joyous time? Your English teacher, to be precise, and you're quite the creative sort.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You take that.
Anyway, creatively moving on. Tell us about Jemima Vowd.
So, Jemima Nicholas was a cobbler. She was born in Mathry, I believe, and lived in Fishguard. And she has gone down in Welsh legend as the woman who saved us from the last attempt at French invasion. Mm-hmm. Parts of this story, I'm sure, are wrapped up in myth.
Yes.
There are certain things that are factually accurate.
Yes.
But the fact remains that she was quite an Amazonian woman who was very annoyed at the idea of the French coming and invading.
Yes.
So she went and rounded some of them up and marched them back into Fishguard.
12 of them.
Yeah, 12 Frenchmen. What I always loved about...
Not Lotharios.
What I always loved about this story when I was growing up, because obviously I heard it a lot from my grandfather, was just this idea that she had, well, in my mind, and the way the story was told to me, she'd gone and got a load of other women from the town, and they'd marched out onto the cliff tops dressed in their traditional Welsh outfits.
Yes.
And that the French had seen them from the sea and had thought that they were soldiers with their pitchforks and their red jackets and their tall hats, which intimidated them.
So a bit of historical context is it's 1797, it's February, it's the 23rd, and the seas are stormy, and the French are attempting to invade Ireland, and what they've done is they've sent out 3 separate garrisons to sort of to take certain places before Ireland, whilst a large troop of about 15,000 invaded Ireland. However, the only one to actually land was the one in Fishguard, and the majority of the troops were convicts or deserters, and ended up all being massively drunk.
Yeah. I think that's quite an essential part of the story,
Very
although
essential.
Not part of the story I was told as a child.
No.
It was far more heroic when
Quite.
I heard it.
And Tate, who was the leader of the French forces, who was actually an Irish American, gave up because he said that on the cliff tops there seemed to be troops of thousands of redcoats. And the theory is that it's...
Yeah, it wasn't thousands of redcoats. It was probably just about 10 really angry local women, which is brilliant. I love that my ancestor was one of them leading the charge. But what I also love about this, and I think we're going to allude to this later in this discussion, is whenever there's a rebellion, it seems to be maybe a Welsh thing or maybe specific to Pembrokeshire. There seems to be an element of cross-dressing.
Mistaken identity. It's an English theme.
Yeah, I think it is, which I love. I love that's part of the Welsh thing. But no, the fact of the story is that she did march up to Llanunda, where, as you said, some of the troops managed to get on land and spent their time getting absolutely blind drunk.
Yeah.
When she travelled the 4 miles from Fishguard to Llanunda.
Yes, it's 3.7.
3.7.
And Google Maps claims that it would take 58 minutes, but due to the hiking staff that was the pitchfork and her temper, we believe that she would have travelled that in about a quarter of the time.
She quite possibly could have, but she was dressed in traditional Welsh outfits,
true.
so to count for all the skirts. She got there, found 12 very, very drunk Frenchmen, rounded them up using her pitchfork as a weapon, and then marched them back into Fishguard, where she took them, I'm not quite sure why, to St Mary's Church, and then locked them inside the church.
She did.
To be discovered by the authorities. I mean, it must have been quite a sight.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen it happening. But I think there's definitely a sense of genuine heroism there.
Certainly.
But I think the overriding emotion was probably rage.
Rage
just
that they had invaded.
Pure rage, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything has been passed down through our family line, it's that sense of wherever there's an injustice, we get really blooming angry about it. I'm glad I haven't got a pitchfork.
Okay. We'll get one of those brought in.
Could you?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we could. And yeah, there's a gravestone outside of St Mary's Church that refers to her as this great heroine of the town, and every I don't know, is it annually? They dress up. There are many Jemimas, and it's a sort of a heroic figure in Fishguard.
Yeah,
particularly that's celebrated, but it's not that widely known actually in South Pembs.
I think they started this tradition when it was, I think it was the 1997 200-year anniversary, and they recruited a Jemima. I did try to put my mum forward, but she hasn't got the stature. They did manage to find this amazing woman with a heaving bosom. Perfect for it. David Emanuel designed the dress, which was quite a big deal. So obviously really wanted to market properly.
Yeah, wow.
And I think since it's become something of a tradition. But prior to that, they used to mark the anniversary of it by rewarding the descendants of Jemima half a crown for her courage.
So you're bawling.
Pardon?
So you're bawling.
Yes. It's my half a crown. So I think when this initially happened, she was obviously rewarded by the county. And then after her death, that reward continued to be given to the family. Sure. So it's half a crown every year on the anniversary of the invasion.
Lovely.
Don't believe it rose with inflation.
Sadly not.
It became it's just a tradition to mark the occasion.
Even when the crown was obsolete, they were still giving out a little...
just desperately.
There's a crown, we found one.
The last person in my family to go and receive the reward was my great-grandfather.
Is that this fellow here?
That's that fellow there. His name was Charlie Waters.
Charlie.
Yep.
And there's Bessie there.
That's him and his wife Bessie.
Who bears an incredible resemblance.
Thank you very much. To whom?
I'm not going to say anything more than that.
So Charlie Waters and his wife Bessie, they used to live in Wiseman's Bridge, and he worked in the mines over there. She worked on the coal exchange in Saundersfoot Harbour. But when all of that industry fell apart, they moved into Pembroke and became the landlord and landlady of the Cross Oars.
Lovely.
In Main Street. And then once they finished there, they moved to the Black Rabbit Club in Orange Gardens, again in Pembroke, which is just up the hill.
Oh, yeah.
He was a landlord of a pub, but he couldn't bear people to be very drunk. He really didn't enjoy extreme drunkenness.
Okay.
The reason that he stopped going to claim the half a crown was because people would use it as an excuse to get absolutely blind drunk. Maybe an homage to the French soldiers. I don't know. But he said he couldn't take it anymore.
So one day he brought a pitchfork.
So rounded them all up. So he just decided, no, it wasn't for him anymore. And so stopped going. But my grandfather remembers him going. It was a really annual big deal.
Yeah.
Had he continued, my grandfather then would have been the next in line to receive the reward, because it went to all of her direct descendants, and it was the eldest son of each of those families that would receive it.
All right. And I suppose that is Jemima Nicholas.
Yeah, Jemima Vowr. Isn't that cool though?
That is amazing.
Called Jemima Vowr.
Yeah.
She must have been a hell of a woman. And I am really proud to be a descendant of Jemima Nicholas, because what
it's
a cool
incredible.
story.
It's so cool.
Yeah. And even if they were all drunk, and even if it might have been easy to round them up, she still did it. And she's the only one that did.
Exactly. And
what were the men doing? Where were they?
So she must have been an incredible
I think
woman,
she must have been
she?
a force of nature because, I mean, she was 47 when this happened, which then was pretty old.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
she did live until she was 82. That's 35 more years after the event. She must have been a very healthy, very strong and powerful woman. I don't know whether she married ever or not.
But aside from that, I mean, her headstone reads Jemima Nicholas and not Jemima
not
Nicholas,
wife of. She's never
wife
seems
of
to be
Barry.
belonging of anybody or to anybody. And so this is, for the time, this is a woman who really stands out as being incredibly different.
Well, Jemima Vowed means Jemima the Great.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's sort of a reference to her height and stature, I'm sure, as well, because it also means big, but it is Jemima Vowed as in Jemima the Great. And how fantastic that she was able to do this and that she's still honoured today. People are still talking about this story now. Makes me proud, really proud.
Right, and hopefully more people will know about this story in South Pembs at last. So, having just spoken with Naomi about the Fishguard invasion and her maternal side and how she is steeped in Pembrokeshire's history, we're now going to talk about her paternal side and her great-great-great-grandfather, who was part of the Rebecca Riots.
Yes, he was. George Griffith, my great-great-great-grandfather, he was born in Monachlog Ddu, and he happened to be a farm labourer working in Wen.
Okay.
At the time of the riots, yes.
The Rebecca Riots.
Indeed. So the Rebecca Riots ran from 1839 to 1843. And they happened as a result of a perfect storm of hideousness that was happening in the area at the time.
Yeah.
So in the early 1800s, there'd been a huge sort of growth in population, which meant that times were hard, employment was difficult to find. So people were living in difficult times. A lot of people were smallholders. They were tenant farmers of small holdings, which made enough money to support themselves and their families, but little else. They had to pay quite high rents to the landlords, the landowners.
And to the church.
And to the church. So we'll come on to that. So the landowners decided that they would actually be able to make more money if they combined some of these small holdings into larger farms. And rented them as larger estates. But of course, a lot of the average smallholder tenant farmers couldn't afford that increase in rent. So that caused problems. At the same time, they introduced new poor laws into England and Wales. I think that was in about 1836, which meant that instead of poor relief being given to capable workers, they just put everybody in workhouses. And the conditions in the workhouses was so awful. They purposefully made them terrible because the government believed that...
Character building.
Well, yes, but they truly believed that the poor were poor because of a lack of character and because of bad behaviour.
Yeah.
They didn't recognise the massive influence that they had on the poor and their situation in the first place. So you've got the poorhouses on one hand, you've got the difficulty of the increase in population, you've got hard times due to landowners trying to make more money for themselves. And then on top of all of that, these tenant farmers had to pay tithes to the church. Now, tithes to the church up until the 1830s had usually been in-kind contributions, so they'd give them crops or wool, and they'd pay in that way.
I think there'd been a series of poor harvests actually that preceded that.
There were poor harvests in 1837 and 1838 as well.
Yeah.
But the anger coming from the tax to the church was very real and very keenly felt, because when they introduced a new law that said you couldn't pay in kind anymore, you had to pay monetarily, that became an even more difficult task for these already very poor tenant farmers, coupled with the fact that 80% of West Walians were nonconformists. They didn't even go to church. They didn't go to those churches. They didn't belong to them. They couldn't even speak the language of those churches. The gentry, the landowners, the Church of England, they were all English speaking.
Yeah.
The rest of these guys were Welsh language. And so you've got all of this happening, which is brewing. Some discontent is brewing.
Yes.
Then they go and decide to introduce something called toll gates.
Turnpikes.
They created turnpike trusts, which were made of, again, the gentry.
Of course.
Who, it was unregulated, so they could put as many gates as they wanted along a route, and they could charge whatever they wanted for you to be able to pass through that route. Now, these farmers had to pass through these routes because they needed to get their crops and cattle to market and from market. They had to go towards the coast to collect lime, because lime was a huge resource in farming because it improved the soil. So a lot of these roads, they purposely picked as lime roads, which was a direct route to the lime, and also route to market. So you could potentially be passing through 3 or 4 of these gates just to get from A to B.
And then end up with less money than you started with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it all started to kick off, as they say. A group of men who had had enough of this decided that the best course of action would be to just destroy these toll gates. So the first one that was destroyed was in May 1839 in Ethelwen. The men that destroyed the gates decided to catch the turnpike guards unawares by dressing as women.
Of course, a bit like with...
So Jemima gets mistakenly identified as a big Welsh man. And
they obviously
these
were
guys,
taking a leaf out of her
they
book, weren't they?
So they decided to dress as women to charge the toll gates, and they did it very successfully. They called themselves Merched Becca, the Rebecca Riots, after a verse from Genesis in the Bible, which said...
Verse 60.
Verse 24,
verse
chapter
24.
60.
Oh, that's it. Forgive me. Yeah.
And it says, "May your descendants possess the gates of those which hate them." And that became the motto of the Rebecca Riots. Oh. So they destroyed the toll booth at Ethelwen, and George Griffith, my great-great-great-grandfather, was one of those original rioters.
Amazing.
The authorities were obviously furious at this, so they rebuilt the gate immediately. Yeah. So Rebecca and her daughters went out and just destroyed it again in the June.
Nice.
And so began a series of subsequent rebellions by Rebecca and her daughters, which then lasted until 1843.
Sure.
For me, that's a huge and very significant part of Welsh history. Yeah. This idea of being exploited. Yeah. Has caused huge repercussions that are still rumbling today.
And it was still felt violently until the 70s, 80s, I suppose.
Yes, very much so. And I think it has echoes with what is happening politically in the world now. It's just exploitation on a grand scale and a failure to understand what life is like for the average working person. So I couldn't be prouder that my great-great-great-grandfather was one of the ones leading the charge in this. That's an incredible link to have. Yeah. According to the history books, he was also a noted Eisteddfodwr, as well as one of the original rioters.
Noted, but
celebrated. I don't know whether celebrated. But clearly the Welsh language issue was very, very important to him. Yeah. So I think it's all of these different social issues that still rumble on today sort of had their origins there, really.
Yeah. And again, that returns to a Pembrokeshire thing, doesn't it? The first one happened in Pembrokeshire. Okay, so tell me a bit more about George Griffith.
So George Griffith, without an S.
Without an S, forgive me.
Was the son of Daniel Griffith from Monachlog Ddu. Daniel Griffith and his other sons were all slate quarrymen in North Pembrokeshire. Okay. George was more physically robust than his siblings and his father, and he decided against going into that tradition of slate quarrying because...
Surely if he was more physically robust, he'd be better suited to doing that.
You would have thought so, but they strongly believed that there was something called slate sickness. And there was something called slate sickness, but they believed that it was because the slate was giving off some harmful...
Voodoo.
Yeah, harmful juju. Because it didn't want to be disturbed or meddled with.
Okay.
And he'd seen his father and his brothers all become weak and ill as a result of that work. So
it goes back to the respect of Wales.
Respect the land.
Yeah.
And so he decided that wasn't for him, which is how he ended up in Effelman in the first place, as a farm labourer in one of these tenant small holdings.
Yes.
After the riots, he decided to go off and become a railway worker. So he was part of the construction of the South Wales Railway, which he then continued to work in for the rest of his life.
Which was more about the exploitation of Wales.
Yeah, again,
which is sort of
in a different way.
Wrong direction.
Yeah.
From there onwards. But
yeah. So he became a plate layer on the railways. He married a woman called Phoebe, and he ended up living at her family home, which was in Pantacadno. In Llantysilio, and Pantacadno is another small holding which sits within an Iron Age settlement.
Wow.
Yeah, which is pretty cool, isn't it? So they had a few children. One of his daughters, Margaret, had a daughter out of wedlock.
Oh.
Her name was Alice.
Even more rebellion.
Yeah. And George and Phoebe brought up Alice as their own daughter to save Margaret's scandal.
Yeah.
And then Alice, who went into service with James Williams, the wine merchants of Narberth. She was a maid in their house. She is my great-grandmother.
Oh.
That's the link. That's the linking line.
And what you were saying about it's still felt today around the world, the effects of the Rebecca Riots.
I think the rumblings of the dissent, the reason for it, is still felt today. I think we have...
Well, to be Welsh is...
Yeah, to be proud of being Welsh and to be protective of your land and your country and your language and your rights.
Yeah.
It's not a Welsh thing, but it is a real rich part of Welsh culture and history and what it means to be Welsh. I think connection to the land, respect for it, is central to how we feel as Welsh people.
Completely.
And being told what we can and can't do by what we consider to be outsiders.
Yeah, he's completely... I know this sensation.
It is where the rebellions rise up, and rightly so. You know, I think we've been oppressed for generations, and I'm not saying that we still are today, but I still think there's a reason that the Welsh language movement is as prevalent as it is. I think that we are still trying to reclaim a lot of lost culture.
Yeah.
I certainly don't believe that we're victims.
No.
There are far
worse off.
Far worse off. And I'm not saying that the Welsh are angels either. I mean, you could argue that the journey to Patagonia was an example of colonisation by the Welsh. So it's not that we're exempt from guilt or blame.
No.
But I do feel that there is still a lot of that anger that was felt by those rioters back then in the 1800s has echoes today.
Yeah.
It's what we do with it, though, is important. How do we channel it? How do we make it something that brings people together rather than creates further division?
Well, David Lloyd George got the Welsh to join up in the war by expressing freedom as being something they could attain. I don't know that was entirely achieved.
No, but that sense of being free, that idea of freedom,
is vital.
Yeah, it's vital to all humans, wherever they are, or feel that they are being oppressed.
Yes.
And I just love that in order to do that, and in order to attain that freedom, sometimes the Welsh have to cross-dress to get there.
I remember actually my first introduction to Amnesty International was you asking me to write letters. Yeah. So it obviously has carried down through the lines.
It has carried down through the lines. It has. My dad was the same. My mum is the same. She's the one that first ever introduced me to Amnesty International, but my dad was a huge campaigner for social justice.
Well, he did Christian Aid in Pembroke Castle, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. So he... Yeah.
Oh, tell us more about that.
Okay.
Go on.
So my dad, Philip Howells, was a Pembroke legend, sadly no longer with us. But as part of one of his campaigns against social injustice, he decided to raise awareness for prisoners of conscience by going on hunger strike with his best friend.
Yes.
And sleeping in the oubliette in Pembroke Castle for 3 nights. They would chain themselves to a bench outside the town hall during the day, where people could donate money to the cause, which was all then given to Christian Aid. And then the reason behind sleeping in the oubliette was to raise awareness for prisoners of conscience.
Yeah.
Now, I think you've seen the oubliette in Pembroke Castle.
I have.
It's
certainly
a horrible place. It's a hole in the ground, but the oubliette is to forget, isn't it? So they put the prisoners in there to forget about them.
Yeah.
So the fact that they stayed in there for 3 nights still gives me the creeps. They had a journalist with them from the Western Telegraph for the first night who was supposed to be there for the duration. He made it through the first night and refused to go back. So that gives you an indication of just how horrible it probably was in there and how eerie. But they did it because it was a really important statement.
Yeah.
And they also raised a heck of a lot of money over those 3 days. They raised £2,000, which when you're thinking this is in the 70s, that's a huge sum of money. Yeah.
It should be done again.
It should be done again. You should do it, Tom.
I should do it. I should do it. I need to talk again at Pembroke Castle and see about doing it, and then we can document it.
Yes.
And put it and turn it into a...
Oh, like a most haunted.
Well, yeah. I mean, we see whether John Whithorn comes back.
See how long it takes for you to completely lose your mind.
Not too long. Not too long. Right, and I think that is a perfect ending to a discussion about the Rebels of Pembrokeshire. And I suppose you yourself are one.
Proudly so.
Proudly so. Thank you so much for coming, Mrs. Chiffi.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Brilliant. See you next time on Postcards and Podcasts.